don't have all of the sources to articulate that. There's some topics that are studied to heck, but we don't when it comes to local history. We have a lot of students who go to schools named after people and don't know who they are. I work with Henry Clay Ashland, and they're really trying to be thoughtful about reckoning with the history of slavery there. The story of Charlotte Dupuy, she was a woman enslaved there who sued Henry Clay for her freedom. It was a national story. He was Secretary of State of the country. She was imprisoned for a while, then sent down to Louisiana away from her family for I think a couple years. She was eventually given her freedom, but her husband and son weren't. That story should be a story every kid knows, because this was one of the most powerful people in the country who ran for president a number of times, lost every time, and sued him for her freedom when her family was still enslaved. That, what a powerful statement. And she was punished for it. It was something hidden. I'd never heard of her name. I literally came across her name because she was on a plaque and I was walking my dog at the estate. And I was like, I need to know more. I checked out every Henry Clay biography at UK's library. There was like 5 or 6. 2 mentioned her.
Well, we all here black and white.
Yeah.
Trying to fight for equal rights.
Yeah.
Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on.
Looking at the civil rights movement in Kentucky, we have this national experience, we have this local experience. Where do the two meet? The activists in Kentucky, in terms of, boycotts and protests, and the march were women. But if you look at documentation at the time, you wouldn't know it. And I think some of that's intentional too, because it's who do people listen to in history? They listen to the dudes. So some of that is, people kind of recognizing. It's a double-edged sword. How do you push people? How do you push diverse representatives forward, but also acknowledge that the prejudice will impact how people perceive that message? Thinking about women and the Black community in Kentucky and how their voices were often left out, there weren't a lot of sources on that. There's women like Georgia Davis Powers, like Audrey Grievous, who are leading these, who are normal people, who start to see injustice and stand up against it in little ways, and then ultimately see that there needs to be a leader. Georgia Davis Powers, similarly to the March on Washington, they wanted to have a local version. She was already connected to the national movement, so that's where she was able to essentially build buy-in because she could get Martin Luther King and Jackie Robinson to attend. The logistics had to do with then different community organizations to help flyers, advertise, maps. She found like a code of behavior, like how to behave, just like today. They were blamed and said they were being violent and things like that. And when you look at the pictures, you see a lot of women in that crowd, but less frequently are women named or acknowledged in the pictures, in the newspapers, in the program. Everybody knows Martin Luther King's name. The women behind the national and local movements are just less known because they weren't the ones put out front. Very similarly, Bayard Rustin, who was gay, was the thought leader in the movement, but he was not up front because of his orientation. What it makes me think about is a lot of what I like about this work is that it's not just giving name to people, but a lot of times the work of rights movements, we focus on the successes when we really need to focus on a lot of the big and small actions that get there. The importance of civic education and engagement is learning how to fail, because most of civic engagement is failing and figuring out what the next step is.
I think the most beautiful thing that we could do would be to stage a mass sit-in or some type of demonstration and if they did not serve us, to remain until they served us. If arrested, to go in jail and refuse bail. That's what I think will have a much larger impact than just mere arrest. I'd like to hear your comments on it and see exactly what you think and how you feel about it. Tommy?
We've been getting public sympathy, but not enough by just going in and coming out. And if we decide to spend Christmas in jail, then I'll go. That's all.
I have quotes from some kids in Hendersonville, Kentucky, who did their own sit-in at a cafe, like the Woolworths sit-in. It was essentially a few teenagers who did it. They got in the paper, and it was small. It was something where they saw this was happening across the country. They wanted to be a part of it. The newspapers at the time really focused on the boys, even though the girls did it just as much, if not more. You know, I found one article that talks about this, like academic article. So these kids in Henderson, you know, they didn't succeed in desegregating, but their act wasn't a failure, and that's worthy of, you know, applauding. That's a part of this too, is we might not know their names, but part of the value is knowing their names is because we need to see the long train of how change happens, because it wasn't Martin Luther King, it wasn't Rosa Parks alone. It was all these nameless people who felt like failures.
So much bitterness built up in a person and resentment when you know that you're being segregated against simply because you're black and there's nothing that you can do about it. There is something you're trying to do about it.
This is my home, and though in many instances it has caused me pain, I am first of all an American. On the whole, things are improving, but moreover, everybody knows that things have to improve.